We're live.
Awesome. Hey guys, welcome to EthATL. I'm Kyle Thomas. Really appreciate everyone coming. The purpose for this event really is to introduce you to the Baseline protocol, if you don't already know it, and to really dig in on why the public blockchain is becoming increasingly relevant to enterprise. And we got a really cool group of folks here today to talk through sort of what Baseline is and why the tooling is incredible and the vision is incredible. I really believe in this project and protocol to be the thing that enterprise blockchain really needed to really come together on standards that can drive the industry forward and adoption forward. Thanks for coming. I want to introduce John Wolpert. I've never seen an open source project at this level, of detail, and I've never seen an open source project get so much traction, and I think that's very much a result of John's efforts, and because of him, now we've got this entire community that's sort of rallying around it. And it's quite impressive. So John, I'd love to turn the floor over to you and let you talk a little bit about yourself and Baseline, so folks can start to get their head around it.
Well, thanks, Kyle, and thanks for the kind words. I mean, I think it's been a great team effort, obviously, with 3 companies, Microsoft and Consensus and of course Ernst & Young, working for about 8 months, kicking some cans over and figuring out that there was a generalized pattern that we could get to. We did that starting almost exactly a year ago, and then 14 companies show up and got excited, and now we have 500 more. Seems like it's more every day, and I think that there's going to be this big explosion of major company participation coming. I can't say when exactly, because these always take longer than you expect, but a lot of these companies are going sort of by the book, going through their open source software committees and going up to the CEOs and others to say, hey, are we allowed to be involved in this stuff? And these things take time, but just the sheer number of companies that have contacted us and said that they are doing that suggests that there's going to be quite a wave of participation, or at least exploitation is a sort of a negative sounding word, but utility, or using the pattern in their products. So we're hoping for a lot of, just like we saw in the Java community back in the 90s, you just saw this sort of piling on of companies saying, "Yep, we all need to build this barn together," and then we'll go off and compete on top of that. So yes, I think that's happening.
So talk to us a little bit about the enterprise mainnet.
Sure. So the notion of the enterprise mainnet is simply that for 5 years, we've been talking about enterprise blockchain, and that typically meant enterprise private permissioned implementations of one kind of blockchain or another. And now, 5 years later, we're seeing that if you change your perspective on what we thought the blockchain was for, and turn it from, this is a place where I want to put data, and make a single point of truth. That is an important, interesting phrase. Single point of truth. Say we have a bunch of companies. Excuse me. We all need to be in sync on what we think we know. Let's have a single point of truth. That is, we have a single database or a single state machine that says what we all agree on. That this is where the package is, or this is what the token's value is, or this is who has the token. And so the single point of truth is sort of the mentality that we had in 2015 going into this whole blockchain thing, to say, yeah, let's have a new single point of truth. What we didn't really think about, at least I didn't, is that meant that you have a new threat surface. You have a new place you're going to put data. You're not going to leave it in your SAP system. You're gonna, or your Oracle system, or your Dynamics system, or your Mongo database. You're going to now have this new thing that's going to be shared in a bunch of different companies with different ways of handling security. You're all going to have a node. That means, it means that compartmentalization becomes problematic. So you start to run into all these interesting problems with trying to apply the blockchain pattern to private compartmentalized secret or sensitive data, because and you run into that when you think of things as a database or as a state machine or as a thing to put stuff on, a CRUD layer, a crew layer, right? And that's that 5 years of that, you start to go, well, maybe that's not the way to think about blockchain. Maybe we should think about blockchain as middleware. Let's think about it as a thing that helps us maintain consistency between those traditional systems of record, those databases, those SAPs and Oracles and Mongos. And that's really the genesis of the notion of enterprise mainnet is, hey, we need an always-on, tamper-resistant state machine that we are confident can't lock you out of valid operations. And so you need a big one. You need one that you're confident is not going to get, a Sybil attack or what have you. And you want one that has fairly wide governance. Ethereum mainnet is a pretty good candidate for that. Academically, to speak truth, it may not be the final one, but it's the one that at least I'm a partisan of that one. And it seems to have the right attributes for being a good candidate for being the mainnet. But ultimately, there should be one mainnet, one final state machine that is the last silo for whatever you need to be able to say that these different systems have consistency. Just like we have one internet.
Exactly, yeah.
I should say very quickly, that doesn't mean you can't have lots of blockchains and lots of public blockchains and lots of private blockchains with different performance and privacy attributes, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, you kind of want to have one binding agent for all of those different things, or at least where you need that, you're going to want one. If you're happy to stay balkanized, then stay balkanized, then you don't need that. But if you want to have convergence of consistency and be able to create a consistency or enforce consistency across different state machines quickly and easily without setting up new equipment and negotiating that and expending capital expense to do it, et cetera, generating a new silo for the consistency between, say, you and another partner or a small group, then yeah, having a public blockchain step up and this is the final mainnet is a good thing.
Yeah, I think the Ethereum community, is another like tick in the box for Ethereum is the community itself. It's such a vibrant, inclusive, just amazing community. I think there's a lot. There's still some problems to solve, but I have a lot of confidence in the folks that are in the community. Working on these hard problems, whether it be the zero knowledge proofs. It's just there's a lot of awesome people, right?
Yeah, I mean it's certainly the largest ecosystem. It's a lot of really good projects have come out since Ethereum in 2014, 2015, and they all have really great. Many of them have very good attributes. The one attribute that I sort of ask about is, well, how are you going to overcome the one attribute you're missing, which is 2015, right? 2015 was a moment, and sometimes being present at that moment matters. So, as long as the Ethereum community, if I can for a minute be a little partisan and say, and throw my hat in for the Ethereum blockchain and say that, it keeps evolving, and as long as it stays innovative, as long as it keeps on absorbing good ideas from other projects, then it has a pretty good chance of being the mainnet. An expressive state machine that's used kind of, as the internet's middleware. I don't know that anything really turns into the world computer. I don't think there's ever going to be, even after quantum computing becomes normal, there's not going to be a singleton that can handle all the reads and writes of everybody's backend all the time. That's never going to happen. Never, never say never, but never, right? It was never going to be that. It never should be thought of that. Even with layer 2, you just, the level of coordination required to be the direct backplane of an application where you're doing reads and writes, Twitch gaming and banking, and no, not going to happen. But it could be the world's computer. That is, it's everybody's single state machine for maintaining consistency. And it might be scalable for that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
So after sharding, right? Even after sharding.
Well, yeah, I mean, the ETH1 is just the cornerstone for ETH2, which is really exciting. So what about
but even ETH2, Kyle, is a Cassandra database with no consensus is a really good sharded database. Can't handle every read and write in the world. Just can't.
Of course. No, of course. Okay. So what about gas, though? Let's switch gears a little bit. I know Consensus is looking at a gas station sort of service, and I think one of the big adoption barriers to enterprise is just not wanting to hold crypto. And I think maybe there's some new solutions that we're thinking about that could help that.
In terms of gas, I mean, a lot of companies on the enterprise side will not for some years. I kind of put it at a lot of years, are not going to be holding crypto in order to pay for this middleware layer's transactions, or I wouldn't call them transactions. I would just say, events, right? That they,
messages.
Okay, I've got to deposit a hash on the mainnet. I've got to move a hash. I've got to do some things, right? They're pretty low level stuff, right? Mainly, we're thinking about the mainnet from this perspective as ordering and hash management. Those are the two things it does, right? You order events and you can say, yep, this thing happened before that thing. This thing needs to happen before that thing, or these two things can't happen, from the same state, right? This thing has to update the state, and then the next thing will update the state, but they won't both go from the same state. So ordering and hash management are the only two things that, say, the baseline protocol uses the mainnet for. Doing that cleverly can give you some pretty cool things, but if that sounds boring, it's supposed to. It's a boring, simple set of repeatable processes. And I see Kartheek is on. He can say even more about that. But if you're doing those things, you need to still pay gas, if for no other reason but to stop, to deal with the halting problem of making sure you don't write an endless loop and bring everybody down, right? So the notion of being able to use gas as sort of an operating expense metered fee service for doing these low-level operations without having to set up your own infrastructure or some infrastructure on the cloud for your new partnership or your new consortium. That's pretty cool, but if you have to hold crypto to do it, that's going to be a non-starter for a lot of companies. So a number of people are working on gas services where you can, you're just going to pay them in dollars or fiat, and they will handle the gas for you, but do it in such a way that they don't become a new all-powerful, all-knowing point of control that knows what all of your transactions are. They're just paying your gas, and if we do it in the right way, they don't really know anything much about you or your activities while they do that gas paying. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's just a chicken and an egg problem in terms of getting the anonymity set large enough. But yeah, I think that it's going to be really exciting.
Yeah, I think that's an essential service is, kind of where are you going to get your gas, and can you get that gas from them without them basically owning you, right?
Yeah. So where did you come up with Magic Message Bus? Where did that name come from?
Well, it used in the way that we're using the mainnet. The mainnet seems more like a bus. I wouldn't say a message bus. It's not really an ESB, an enterprise service bus. There's some similar attributes, but it isn't a bus in that you're holding keys and you could hold key value pairs on it, right? So you could dead drop a value onto a topic, and then use that, you know. So say your shipper has a delivery date, and you don't want the shipper to know who you are, so that and or to be able to you know, figure out all your business relationships and how much volume you're doing and who's buying from you. But you need the delivery date to calculate your invoice. You need to be able to drop that invoice onto a bus, onto a bulletin board, to so that you can pick it up without them seeing you pick it up, right? It's classic. It's a classic loose coupling distributed systems model. And from that perspective, we said, well, it's kind of a bus, but it's a magic bus because it's really good at tamper resistance, and it's really good at some other interesting things. It gives you magic powers with your bus. But yeah, and then of course I just wanted to call it the magic bus so that we could play the Who song. Yeah. Too much magic bus.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, John. The public blockchain is never going anywhere. It's always on. It's a great opportunity to use as middleware so that your for example, your ERP users can just continue to use the ERP the way they do today. It's just business as usual. Maybe that's a bit boring. Maybe, you know, maybe it should be. You know,
well, I think that's the exciting
yeah.
thing there is being able to be one with the teams that have come before, right? You know, when I was a young person, you know, it was relational databases was all the rage, right? You know, that was new and exciting, and you know, Oracle came out of that, and Sybase, and all these other. I remember like Stonebreaker and all those guys. You know, they came out of this field, and now that's become converged, and you know, everybody knows about databases, both SQL, non-SQL, relational, non-relational, graph databases. And to be able to say, yeah, the more baselining is going on, the more SAP, the more Oracle, the more Dynamics, the more MuleSoft, you know, the more Boomi, the better, right? So I think that starts to align everybody's interests, because you're not saying, oh, let's move all the data off your SAP system and sunset that and put it on some new threat surface like a blockchain. That's not what we're doing, right? We're just saying, hey, your SAP record and my Oracle record are verifiably identical. And how we got there and how we will go from there is we will maintain continuity. That's it. Now, the big thing about baselining is that we're doing that in such a way that even these little bits of almost noise that we're putting on the mainnet still need to be put there in such a way that you couldn't put an AI on the mainnet and look at the ledger and look at the events and figure things out, right? Everything's got to look like noise. It has to look like sameness, so that people can't start to figure out your patterns of behavior, your relationships, your business activities.
Yeah. So absolutely. What about Hyperledger? I know, you know, you're a co-founder of Hyperledger, and it's a great project. There's a lot of enterprises using it. How do you think the integration looks with Baseline?
Well, I mean, Hyperledger is a great project, and you know, you were saying before, I haven't seen such adoption of a open source project. I've seen a couple, right? Java was a very different kind of open source project. It was very much controlled by Sun Microsystems at the time. But we all did jump on it. Linux itself, the Apache stuff, and then, you know, Hyperledger is a really good example of openly governed open source, the modern way of doing it, right? Where you have a technical steering committee that is voted by contributors, where, you know, no amount of money contributed to sponsoring the thing gives you direct power over what's decided to get merged. You know, it's a pretty good model. I really like it, and that's the model that we use for the. Even though we're using Oasis Oasis is the governing organization, and we love Oasis. What an amazing! I'm so glad we found them. Oasis is actually 20 years older than the Linux Foundation and the Apache Foundation. It's behind SGML and SAML and all sorts of really venerable old school standards. And it's open standards and open source. Hyperledger is very, very much about open source. So it's about a project where you're building a platform together, like Fabric, like Sawtooth, like Iroha, like any number of the projects that are in there. And I remember Brian Bellendorf back just after I was involved with Hyperledger just before he was hired, and then he got involved, and we hung out a bit. And I really like him. I think he's brilliant. He's certainly undeniably one of the most authentic leaders in the space because of his background in Apache, and I mean, he knows what he's talking about. And he said, you know what, I'm going to make this, this isn't going to be just about Fabric. This is going to be about any project that wants to be under an Apache 2 license on blockchain. And as long as they abide by certain rules. I'm like, so you're going to put a whole bunch of different projects that don't have to converge into the same bucket. And he said, yeah. And I said, I think that's a terrible idea, but if I could tell you not to do it, then I couldn't claim to not be in control of the thing. So go for it. And you know what? He was right. He did the right thing, I think. So it's a great big project full of lots of stuff. And hopefully that's starting to converge. The different projects are now starting to bake together and see connection points. And of course, we now have an Ethereum project in Hyperledger Besu. Hyperledger Besu is the Ethereum, is a project where you have a client and it can handle both private and public blockchain as a node. So I think that's a very specific thing. Hyperledger is about code development. And Oasis is about, hang on for a second. Oasis is about open standards and open code development. But that's really where Baseline is not like Fabric. Baseline is not a project, a platform or a product. It's a specification for a way of doing things, a technique. And so it's appropriate for Oasis as a standard.
Yeah. So John, you have a couple of minutes left. Yeah, I'll just give you the floor to close things out.
Yeah, well, I think if there are folks out there that are, I mean, I know that I saw the list of people that were signing up to be to watch the show today, and if there are any folks that want to get involved, I mean, it could not be easier to get involved with the Baseline project. And all it requires is sort of what folks like Kyle have done, which is just show initiative. You just get in, you start doing stuff, spell check a thing. Help on somebody else's project, come up with your own idea. And then we have ways of promoting those projects and getting them, getting what is becoming just a giant army of people to get up behind them and help. And so, just go to baseline-protocol.org, get on the Slack, get on the GitHub, and when you're ready, get in the SSC or the TSC meeting. Join our office hours every Wednesday at noon, and start doing stuff.
Start doing stuff. Yeah, it's a great project. I definitely encourage everyone to get involved. Thanks a lot, John, for your time today.
Thanks.
Up next, we have Derek Collison, talk about folks who know open source software. Derek, I've had the pleasure of crossing paths with him in the open source community, and this guy knows open source software. I've also, had the pleasure to work on the initial spec for the Baseline protocol, and it just made a lot of sense based on Nats and what Derek has built with that community to make it a first-class citizen in the Baseline protocol for the messaging component. We sort of talk about how Baseline is an enterprise or a magic message bus that uses the public blockchain. But really, there's a lot of the real devil in the details. There is all of the messages that happen off chain and how those messages need to be secured off chain, and that's sort of where I saw Nats playing a pivotal role in the protocol. And so, Derek, I'm going to turn the floor over to you and let you talk about Nats and your background. And thanks for being here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. I appreciate it. And Yeah, happy to be here. I've spent the probably better part of my career, coming up on 30 years now, with technologies that power distributed systems, right? And I think what we're talking about today could be considered one of the largest distributed systems that we're looking at doing, right? The notion of blockchain, and even to John's point of how it doesn't have to be one, but there's synchronization between them, right? And so throughout the 90s and the 2000s, I worked on systems that felt like they were good and did some powerful things, but I thought something was still missing, which was this notion of the internet event or the global cellular network event for digital system services and devices. And what I mean by that is right now, even today, the state of the art in technologies to communicate between different components of distributed systems is kind of like the 1970s landlines, right? You have to know who you're talking to, what IP or load balancer, what port, all kinds of different things. And so NATS was taking a very different approach to becoming kind of a utility for secure and trusted communications, where everything is hyper connected, but it's secure and isolated by default. But the ability to connect is not a large, massive effort, right? It's simply there. And Kyle, you and I have been working together for a while on some of the early work that you've been doing, and have been both very appreciative of the NATS technology, but also pushing back and working with us to make the product even better. But I think if we have a world where the ability to securely communicate between all these digital system services and devices is kind of like electricity, or kind of like the global cellular network. It's just there. You don't really even know about it. I think that's incredibly powerful. And I spent about 7 or 8 years running a company that was trying to do application deployments and things like that, but in a secure and trusted way. And so what the baseline protocol and what some of the work that everyone is doing here is very interesting to me, right? Because I believe at the end of the day, communications without trust and security is kind of meaningless. It's actually, it's more than meaningless. It's, to be frank, it can be very dangerous, right? And I think we're seeing that in our modern world, where if I can't really trust the data that I'm seeing, I can't really respond to it and react. So for those who don't know, NATS is a open source technology. It's about 10 years old. I originally built it to power Cloud Foundry, which was a platform as a service offering out of VMware at the time. It's back at VMware now, I think, right? From going to Pivotal and then back. It combines multiple messaging patterns, so it's extremely flexible. It doesn't kind of paint you into a corner. And the two abstractions that we care deeply about are service-based interactions. That's when you ask a question and you get a response. And then streams, right? Where you're just publishing data or events that are coming out. And both of those are available in the same technology. We care deeply about forward-looking security. And so the system never has private keys or passwords. And that's one of the things that I think Kyle was attracted to, as well as the fact that you can form arbitrarily large and complex topologies of servers that can span the whole globe. So think of those like, cell towers. You don't really know about the cell towers, but they kind of all work together and mesh together, and NATS can be built and constructed in the same fashion. And so, yeah, so the amazing abilities of what the baseline is trying to do with kind of a standardized way of doing blockchain, such that it's always available and it's kind of always there. Even if it's different instances of it, NATS plays into that extremely well.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to talk a little bit about NGS?
Sure. So one of the things that I think is been an interesting discussion point, and I think it's applicable probably for baseline and implementations of baseline as well, is that in general, technologies have been forced people into own and operated or software as a service. And what I mean by that is you have to choose one or the other. So you're either going to run your own servers, your own software components, or you're going to use a utility, but there's really no way to kind of combine the best of those worlds. Kind of, again, a bad metaphor maybe, but the ability for me to put a cell tower in my backyard if I want to, but there's no additional things I have to do. My phone just works great at the house, but as I drive down the street, it connects to the next cell tower and everything kind of works. And so what Kyle's talking about with NGS is that the core open source technology, NATS, allows you to mix and match utility service-based models with owned and operated servers, meaning you can create a public utility or a very large organization, company-owned utility of connectivity using NATS, and individuals, partners, other organizations, other companies are allowed to extend that such that the complete system is being worked by the shared utility and individually owned and operated servers. And NGS is our global network. So it's a single URL that's kind of like a digital dial tone. It's available on all major cloud providers, all major geos. But what's interesting about it is that you can easily extend it and run your own servers and have your own applications communicating at extremely high throughput, low latency with your own security domain. But transparently, the system will react and flow messages into NGS, our global network, as needed. If you're trying to reach services that are somewhere else, let's say a different baseline protocol org, that we're trying to interoperate with. Or if you're simply talking to people that are local to you, the system automatically reacts, adjusts. And so, after 30 years and the team with 150 plus years experience, we're very good at routing and framing messages that aren't addressed to an individual machine, right? Or an individual port, but that kind of work the way we expect things to work, which is, oh, I know John's name and I can connect to him, and it doesn't matter where he is in the country, out of the country, what cell provider or what internet service he has, it just kind of works. And so NATS is trying to power that and really kind of highlight solutions like this one to be a core enabling technology for.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Derek. The more I think about NGS, the more intrigued I get with how potentially it could be leveraged for increase the anonymity in terms of just adding baseline protocol messages to that fabric, and maybe getting some anonymity because of the scale that's playing on. Because currently, in the current base implementation of the baseline protocol, we have an org registry contract. We're storing basically each organization's NATS endpoint in the contract, which is like a public endpoint. It works, it's more point to point, which is which is what we were looking for out of sort of in this iteration. We wanted an organization to be able to dial another organization, exchange protocol messages and then hang up, and that's working quite well. But the more I think about NGS, the more I sort of raise an eyebrow and get excited about what we might be able to do with it in terms of anonymity on the network.
Yeah, I think you raise a great point. That's why I think there's such good alignment with what we care about philosophically and what you guys are pushing. Leaking metadata is one of the worst things you can do. And even to John's point where he was talking about, if someone's looking in, everything should look like noise. We've actually had those discussions ourselves in terms of instead of, firing a message off, the messages are sent every 100 milliseconds and they're always between a certain size and it's encrypted inside and it looks like noise. But even within, systems like NATS where I can send, let's say, a request to Kyle, and Kyle can respond to me, right? There's a reply subject that's how he gets back to me in these interactions that he's talking about. That reply subject could be considered leaked metadata, right? And so NATS has even gone to the point of saying, we want to drive almost a zero trust information system. And we allow, through secure multi-tenancy, the ability to move between secure accounts. But when you move across a secure account, the system will anonymize for every single message at millions of messages a second, the reply subject that Kyle sees. And so to John's point around blockchain and the importance of things looking like noise, NATS will do that, in setups where I'm crossing accounts and I'm sending a request into Kyle's private account. Kyle has authorized me to do that. So he knows I'm allowed to do it. But the reply subject, which is the only thing that NATS is actually controlling, the payloads are opaque to us. We don't care what you're sending or not per se, are anonymized, right? And so you have no clue what where I am. It's always random. Now that being said, we do have the notion to say, oh, I know Kyle though, and I'm going to opt in and allow Kyle to see a lot of information about me. But I think it's important that the default is that we don't leak that type of information, right? And that's I think incredibly important, and it's really well aligned with what the team is doing with the baseline protocol and what NATS cares about. I mean, that's for me, that's one of the neatest things was the philosophical alignment. Even though one is kind of moving bits around with NATS, and the other one is driving blockchain to a secure and equally agreed upon secure consensus model for trusted computing. As soon as you peel back the mechanisms of how things are working, the core is very much the same in terms of the philosophies, right? Which is secure, trusted, distributed computing. So yeah, I've gotten a huge kick out of working with Kyle and others and meeting John and folks. And we hope to be part of the project and be an enabling tech that makes it even better.
Awesome, Derek. Yeah, thanks a lot. It's a true pleasure working with you as well. I know you have some time constraints this morning, so I'll say thanks again.
Yeah, no worries, and thanks for having me. And yeah, we look forward to moving forward. It's good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Derek. So up next, we have Stefan Schmidt, the co-founder and CTO of Unibright. Hi, Stefan. How are you?
Hi, Kyle. I'm fine. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here.
I will try to share my screen if you make me host.
Oh. There you are, sir. So Stefan's going to talk to us about sort of in that onto the next part of this narrative, right? We've talked about the baseline protocol and its inception and a little bit about open source. We've talked about NATS and how it's a mature, very mature enterprise messaging open source project that can achieve massive scale. We talked about how we're incorporating NATS into the baseline protocol. And now Stefan is going to talk a bit about Unibright and how to baseline your ERP system, probably heavily in the context of SAP. Stefan, I'll stop talking.
All right. Can you already see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So yeah, thanks again for having me. Thanks for the opportunity to present here at EthAtlanta. So especially thanks to you, Kyle, for hosting the event and bringing people together. This is what open source also is about. Yeah, short remark on my person. I am CTO of Unibright. We are a German blockchain integration company. I'm also a member of the technical steering committee within Baseline. My personal background is more on the techie side, so I'm a master of computer science. I love hard rock music and soccer, and I speak English with a German accent, so I hope you don't mind. I think I'm the only non-native speaker today, so yeah, I try to make myself audible as possible. So yeah, baselining your ERP, quite a big topic if you just take a look at the buzzwords. So perhaps let's take a look what ERP or enterprise resource planning is all about. If you look up just one of the basic definitions on the internet, you would just find that ERP is the integrated management of main business processes, often in real time and mediated by software and technology. Perfect short description, but there are so many details that we could dive into that I think this format will not be enough. So let's just extract some of the key concepts that I want to talk about today in regards to baseline. So we talk about integration, about the main business processes, and the mediating software part. So as for integration, a definition could be that integration is the process of bringing together the component subsystems into one system, or bigger picture, the process of linking together different computing systems and software applications physically or functionally to act as a coordinated whole. So I think integration is just the key concept that also brings all the benefits of the baseline protocol to life. And this is why not only in front of the background of being CTO of an integration company, it's just the emphasis of this presentation will be on integration. And main business processes supported by ERPs can cover the financial accounting part, human resources, manufacturing, order processing, supply chain management, CRM. And it's important if you think about very big enterprises, then you will have integration on different levels. So even an application to application integration within one big enterprise can be a challenge on its own. And if we then extend the scope to B2B integration and perhaps even across borders or currency borders, it gets even more complicated, but also a very exciting subject and level. And mediating software, I understand this in the scope of this presentation as middleware or as object translators, as integration engines. So every software that somehow helps to bridge the gap between different participants of an integration process. So just taking a look at blockchain, there are different approaches on how to understand blockchain in regards to business integration or blockchain in regards to enterprise usage in general. And I think everybody in the space can tell their own stories on that, especially in 2019, when a lot of pitches towards enterprises for using blockchain were covered by concerns on blockchain in general, or confusing the terms or understanding blockchain equal to Bitcoin. And yeah, I think fortunately we passed this phase, and now can take a look on blockchain from the different perspective in regards to business integration. And John already mentioned that in his intro statement, that there are different perspectives. So perhaps a very early perspective on how to understand blockchain was more like putting data on the chain. So understanding blockchain just as a distributed database, which does not work in its entire idea. And the effect on integration is actually low because technically the place where you store data does not mean so much on how it can be integrated into processes or existing tech stacks. So yeah, let's move on to the next phase. Putting logic on the chain. So understanding blockchain as a distributed world computer with smart contracts enabling a common logic across all participants. Nice idea, also perhaps not that scalable, at least not on the current technical level. And again, the effect on integration is not that big, because even if you put the logic in a smart contract on the blockchain, then you still have the situation that many bigger enterprises have their ERP system in place, perhaps since decades, still paying the license costs for another 10 years or 20 years. So it's not that easy to put just everything on the blockchain. And putting trust on the chain, so understanding blockchain as a common frame of reference or notary service. Yeah, good take. And still there are some things left to be tackled in terms of understanding blockchain as a system of enabling integration. So what is needed? If we want to use blockchain for business integration, then what is actually needed? I listed up some, but not all items. So an easy access for all participants it's mainly about smaller companies. So for example, if you have a buyer supplier setup and you have also smaller suppliers, they have to be integrated into business processes. And it should not be the only way for them to be integrated to just use the main ERP of the leading buyer, but they also have to have a way to get an easy access to onboard, even if they are not using an ERP system at all, or if they're perhaps just organizing their stuff in Excel or spreadsheets as they are ERPs. It's nothing to be ashamed of. As long as you can be part of an integration process, you're good to go. Pay-per-use is tackling the fact that many integration processes are occurring on an ongoing basis, some of them even real time. But there are also processes where data is exchanged, for example, only once a month, and the integration solution has to be still to be accessible for all participants, but just when they use it. So if blockchain should be considered as a cost-saving component so that enterprises actually decide to go with blockchain, it has to be ensured that for blockchain-based integration, there is a pay-per-use model in place, and that you do not pay for something that you only need once a month. The no restriction in usage is pretty much addressing the same issue, not on a budget level, so to say, but rather on the technical level to make it easy to access and integrate. Process orientation and domain models. Yeah, this is a crucial point, which in my or in our Unibright opinion, is very often forgotten or addressed too late when tackling integration scenarios, because no matter how great an underlying technology is, the actual success of an integration process will also be measured by how smooth and seamlessly it presents itself to the actual end user. So therefore, it's really important to address the domain specialists and on a business process level and provide domain models that the business user would understand. For example, a procurement specialist should be allowed to design his process based on models for proposals or purchase orders or invoices, and not based on a protocol or a code or technical adapters. And this is also addressed by low code, adding to the former point. So the more domain specialist will be able to stay and concentrate on his level of abstraction, the easier it will be to establish successful integration processes. And if no or only low code is needed, even better. Yeah, high value and benefit from blockchain. So if blockchain is not just considered to be a buzzword, but brings actual value and benefits, we should show these benefits and we should name them so everybody sees them and can make use of them. So the latest point leads to the major concerns of enterprises about using a public blockchain for business processes: privacy, permission, and performance. And this is also the main reason why many reports on proof of concepts in the blockchain space still go like, yeah, it's productive, but we can show you because we just set up a private chain. In integration processes, though, a private chain with, for example, in an extreme scenario, just one node supervised by the big player in the process is perhaps not that helpful, showing the advantages of distributed technology, and perhaps not that helpful in bringing integration as a concept forward. So Baseline is addressing exactly that, what is needed, and is a solution to these concerns of using the mainnet as part of a middleware. I will not dive into the technical details too much, and the basic ideas already have been covered by John. So it's to keep the data in the respective ERPs of all participants and using the baseline pattern as an integrative middleware to establish a common frame of reference in the public mainnet. from an architecture side, this is how it was presented at the baseline launch. So the idea is that every participant in a integration process will run their own tech stack of microservices that fulfill different tasks in the process, like queuing and persistence, messaging, as we just learned, for example, with Nets, zero knowledge proofs, and API integration, and then notarizing the current state of a integration process on the mainnet without actually showing who did business with whom and what data, but keeping a level of privacy so that participants are engaged to be part of that integration process. We can take a short look at how we did it in a SAP Dynamics 365 demo. So this is the architecture as how it was presented during that demo that we did together with Kyle's team at Provide and Daniel's team at Envision Blockchain. You can check the complete demo walkthrough and on the baseline landing page, and of course check the code in GitHub. The use case was business process automation across SAP ERP and Microsoft D365 via Baseline. So it was a procurement case of exchanging requests for proposals, referencing proposals, and then purchase orders and so on. And what we did here is providing an automated setup of a baseline environment for every participant so that they just have the same tech stack that they can all use on their end. And based on that, every participant could use this stack to exchange data, integrate it into their ERP, prove and verify the current state of the business workflow on-chain. The three boxes you see here is the main architecture. So the baseline containers and then some added layers from Provide and from Unibright ensured that all the different participants in that process had the same level of how to connect to baseline, so to say, using a proxy. And then we had different implementations of this pattern. So for example, the buyer role was done with an SAP system using the Unibright connector. One of the suppliers were done by a Dynamics system using the Envision blockchain connection, also connecting to the underlying tech stack. And by this, we could add many suppliers, many more suppliers, perhaps using just another ERP or using no ERP at all, but Excel or local database, all connecting to the tech stack and making use of the baseline protocol as a pattern. So we provided, we created a minimum domain model and also an automatic generated service access layer on a RESTful API. So this is what I've been talking about earlier to meet the actual process specialists on their domain level. And they should be able to think about this process in terms of proposals, purchase orders, master service agreements, requests for proposals, and not so much in how it's done technically. So from the SAP perspective that we covered within Unibright, we connected to that proxy by mapping big SAP objects meaningful to that small minimum domain models that all the participants in the demo used. And for the user, the integration should look smooth. So here you can see that the user just used his well-known front ends from, for example, SAP on the left side or Dynamics on the right side, and the integration, the actual integration is happening in the background, implementing the baseline pattern and including proofs and verifies on that this synced workflow between a request for proposals on one side, answering with a proposal from the other party, answering with a purchase order, and so on, is all in sync, and all of the participants rely on the same state of the process this is made available by a public available blockchain. So perhaps just some remarks on Unibright and Baseline. So perhaps it's important again to mention that Baseline itself is not a protocol, and it's explicitly it's an explicit demand, request, or wish from the Baseline community that actual enterprises take this Baseline approach and build products around it. So that's what we also do at Unibright, being in the space of business integration with blockchain for around 3 years now. And our approach is basically to support all that what I mentioned earlier, what we think is needed. So we have visual definitions of processes and circuits. We try to generate as many objects as possible automatically, like code generation and API generation. Together with Provide, our partner, we also offer just one-click automatic deployment. So to make it short, to make it as easy as possible for a participant to be part of an integrated process via Baseline, and to staying on the domain or process level as long as possible, and not having to care so much about the technical details and the underlying details. Also, what we also offer is an integrated payment model. So talking about the idea of a gas station, I can totally second what John said earlier, that it's not very likely for big enterprises to hold crypto, especially if you think of cross-chain scenarios where you have perhaps another blockchain or a private blockchain as another state machine that you want to baseline with another chain or another ERP, and you have to care about different transaction cost models underlying. So the idea is to have from our side, to have an integrated payment model with a Unibright token, also including the transaction costs of the underlying mainnet. And one of the tasks will be how to integrate a concept of a gas station here, so that in the end user just pays for what he sees and uses, and perhaps not care so much about the underlying payment model, as long as we make that we see some benefit from using a programmable token, for example, to make payment processes or subscription models more easier and perhaps more automated, then this is a win-win for all participants. Yeah, so from our side, perhaps as an outlook, then the next steps of showing how to integrate ERPs with the Baseline protocol or the Baseline pattern, how to baseline your ERP. The next weeks and months will be again about integration, but not so much about technical integration, but about integrating as many participants and players as possible within the organization of Baseline. So finding use cases, working on pilots, and this is something that I want to mention personally that I really like about the Baseline initiative, that it's very much about teamwork. So we already learned and got to know great people just by working on demos together. So not only those who were part of the SAP D365 demo, but also many other individuals, enterprises, and we can also tell that there's a big demand for Baseline and bigger enterprises, perhaps that are not interested in the first place to contribute to an open source model, but who are very interested in using the actual standards because they look for a common frame of reference for a message bus that's always on and not restricted, and makes it easier for them to integrate ecosystems and communities. So given that, the next weeks and months from our perspective will be much about presenting demos and proof of concepts, and of course extracting all the learnings that we have within these cases to provide to the protocol to build our products around it, to connect to other products that are built around it by other companies, defining standards, and bringing the complete topic of enterprise mainnet closer to the real world and to drive adoption here. So yeah, so far for this presentation. Thanks again, Kyle and Provide, for setting this up. Also for inviting me. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me personally at my email, or of course, ensure to check out Baseline, the code, the documentation, and it's a very good starting point to just start with baselineprotocol.org, and you find everything also about the mentioned demos here. Thank you.
Thanks, Stefan. Awesome. Yeah, it was a great demo, and it's been great working with you, by the way. Excuse me. Up next, we have Kartheek from UI Blockchain. Kartheek was really instrumental in the initial building of the Radish 34 demo POC that was initially released to the community, and he's going to talk a little bit about tokenization and Baseline generally. Kartheek, I'll hand host privileges over to you in a second. There you go.
All right. Hello, everyone. This is Kartheek Solipuram. I've been working with the Baseline community for the past few months, ever since we released, and today I'll be focusing on specifically talking about the area of tokenization. So in terms of tokenization, one of the first aspects that comes into picture, as I'm trying to touch upon some of the concepts that John and Stefan went into at a good length, and both in terms of specification and also in terms of how we have actually implemented it, or how the community has actually implemented it, taking a specific SAP / ERP system into consideration. So when we talk about taking some of the lessons learned in both not just in use cases that have enterprise integration, but also in other use cases that have stemmed from leveraging Baseline, one of the areas that has been a key area of focus has been the process of tokenization. There are many areas and many aspects of how tokenization in general has been addressed as a topic for both private and public blockchains. But as we ideated around Baseline and where we should, what kind of business processes should be baselined, and now extending that to tokenization, we try to come up with what are some of the key considerations for business process management tokenization. Some of the inspiration of this stretch of idea also comes from existing models of privacy tokens as implemented in Nightfall, Zcash, and others. So essentially, when we talk about tokenizing, we're talking about attaching a value to a certain business process. So business process valuation between multiple partners is the primary requirement. This is sort of a statement I picked up from one of John's previous presentations, where he mentions that business document management was around business process automation between multiple partners. I'm specifically targeting this to just having a case of valuation for how business processes can be estimated and valued. There are opportunities to leverage shortfalls, surplus inventories, and many other areas where issues in terms of optimization of business processes in one organization can be leveraged across enterprise itself. Then we also know that we also can assume that business assets can be represented as instruments of value that can be monetizable, cannot be double spent, and can be attributed with some exchange value. The most important aspect, as was covered in the previous talks or previous presentations, was around the privacy of both business data, which is around the process internals that actually affect in creating a token or affect in creating a value for that particular business process, as well as the information exchange that happens during that instantiation of such a business process. And finally, one of the most important aspects that we deal with when it comes to tokenization is the general need for an understanding of ownership. What does it mean for transfers, and what is how we can talk about or at least consider different forms of governance on the mainnet. That I think the idea over here is that any form of tokenization that we look at and we talk about it from a baseline perspective, the idea would be to come up with, or at least the effort that we are focusing on right now is to come up with a way or a standard specification, not necessarily a new token standard, but a protocol standard or a specification standard that can be used for taking any existing business processes, assessing them for their business value or economic value or exchange value, and accordingly denominating it as a certain token. Next is, this is something that I wanted to cover just to give a brief outlook of what the baseline protocol of the specification consists of. At the core, we have, based on the efforts that we have done over the Radish 34 and also several discussions and conversations that we've been having around what makes the baseline specification more integrable for enterprises to the mainnet, and also what makes it more makes it more of a lower barrier to entry, not just for enterprises but also for individuals to individuals or consumers to leverage something like a baseline ecosystem. To that extent, part of our efforts, and primarily between the members in the technical steering committee, has been to abstract all the different areas as libraries or packages that could be imported and that could be leveraged for instantiating any form of use case. So loosely speaking, baseline protocol or library spec consists of commitments, which are essentially hashes of data or business logic without revealing private information. And by extension, for token, this would mean that any form of token information or token value or token UI, a token ID or token URLs, or any metadata of a token, which is essentially a business process, with having that committed as a hash or in some manner where the private information is not revealed. Next is the zero knowledge compliant signature verification, wherein one of the primary aspects that we focus on is the necessity to have the different parties who are involved in the enterprise business communication or enterprise business automation, or in this case, enterprise business tokenization, to be able to agree upon the terms that have been used or are being leveraged to create these actual tokens itself. That's where we have the zero knowledge based signature generation and verification that comes in. Thirdly, we have the proof of business process execution, proof that the agreement and its terms, the terms of the creation of the token, have been signed by both parties. And finally, a secure message communication between entities, which essentially is to focus on the communicating the underlying data elements and any other private metadata of the agreement that stipulates the creation of a token. So all in all, each of these libraries is more of a specification, and the different implementations that we have been focusing on are to extend these interfaces for different toolings. So for example, one of the areas we have been looking at is how we can take a general way of standardizing how business communication can happen in a secure manner using secure message communication part of the specification. And one of the plugs, as we have seen in the previous discussion, is using NATs as one such technology enabler for ensuring secure message communication. An alternative that we've tried in Radish was Whisper, And there may be many other plugs that, that enterprises or community may use for actually conducting the secure message communication itself. In a similar manner, we are looking into how different plugs can be associated to create workflow steps or to create these enterprise tokenization process steps for businesses to attach value to their existing business process and transact on this business process in a private and verifiable manner on the mainnet. When we talk about baseline protocol, we talk about specifically when we talk about the interaction with the mainnet, and as was well illustrated by Stefan in the previous presentation, is the area of how two enterprise ecosystems or two separate baseline systems could interact with each other. And when they interact with each other, how mainnet is used as sort of a common frame of reference for consistency, verifiability, and also some form of informed governance. The idea is that essentially what we have done as part of the standardization of the baseline smart contracts or baseline adapters for interacting with the mainnet is to have a standard way in which different smart contracts and different types of smart contracts and versions could be leveraged in such a way that they can represent business logic execution. So in that sense, when we talk about smart contracts, we talk about from a workgroup perspective that every setup of an organization or any onboarding in the case of baseline is dependent on a set of is defined by a set of organizations that conduct business with each other based on mutually agreed rules and terms of relationships. Deployment, one of the ways that baseline addresses is, or at least Radish addresses, is this by leveraging a concept of a global registry using some of the standards like ERC 1820 to be able to commonize or have an entry point for all the different types of contracts that a work group or a set of organizations may deal with. So in the case of tokenization specifically, apart from having a general registry for organizations to manage their metadata, the tokens also, when they are, the idea is that a token registry maintains a dictionary, so to speak, of different tokens. And these tokens are in turn associated with different organizations by means of ownership considerations in the organization, to the organization registry. I'm not trying to go into the implementation details here, but just trying to give a perspective of what could be changing or what would be changing when you start looking at baseline protocol and you think about tokenization, so to speak. And this is, again, this is by no means the only way to do it. This is one way that we are still exploring, and we're hoping that we get more traction and more participation from the community, both from enterprise space, DeFi space, as well as other parties like Oracle's. Finally, I would like to wrap this conversation by going over how it would look like from a business workflow when we talk about from a tokenization perspective. A lot of these pieces are still at a place that need to be further fleshed out in terms of what it means from system to system interactions perspective, but at a high level, we try to project a business flow over here. The idea is that when you have two parties, party A and party B, which are interacting with each other, and party A needs to issue a token to party B. Within the norms of privacy, consistency, and enterprise integration, the process starts with party A generating a token commitment, which is essentially very roughly speaking a hash of a token. They sign that particular hash, send that particular hash via a secure messaging channel to the party B. So the yellow part you see first over there is the aspect of the what we can call as a circuit or an analog of a business logic that could be represented in the form of a cryptographic proof, is what the first piece of generation of token commitment is. And then when you sign it, we are using the API services. When we send the signed commitment, we use something like the baseline messaging services like NATs to be able to send the message. Once party B receives the message, then party B uses their API to be able to sign the commitment in their side of secure messaging communication service to be able to send back the co-signed commitment. At this point, party A creates a proof where they interact with the privacy services and then interact with the blockchain to verify proof. As a result of interacting with the blockchain during verification of proof, there are two meta calls that happen. One is a call to the shield contract, which essentially stores the different hashes of the documents, or in this case, the hashes of the token denominations. And separately, the aspect of minting the token or actually digitizing that particular asset or ascertaining value to that particular business process in the form of a token. And a standard that we have been looking at is the ERC 1155, so that there is a common way for the verification to verify not just proofs associated with non-fungibles, but also fungibles from a common place. Once the verification of proof is done, the proof is sent via the secure messaging service, something like NATS, by the party A to party B. And once at this point, either party A or party B could refer to the shield contract to get the latest of the values of the token, what has been committed, and if there is any other relations that token might have to previous business processes. So that sort of brings me to the end of the presentation. I'll pause and open the floor for questions. Thanks a lot for the opportunity, Kyle and team.
Oh, thanks, Kartheek. I was muted. Does anyone have any questions for Kartheek? I don't see any. Yeah, so I'd like to take a pause. I'd like to take a pause and from our regularly scheduled lineup. Next up is Yorke from Microsoft, but I'd like to give Stephen Garcia from Consensus the floor, and like to have a discussion with him about inclusion, diversity in the blockchain space. You know, I know there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in our world today. I think Atlanta, especially, you know, could use some love. We're all really sort of all in this together. You know, Stephen, what do you have to say? What say you, Stephen?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Stephen Garcia. I am the Chief Information Security Officer at Consensus. Work with John. Been working a lot with Kyle and Ed Bravik on the Security Specifications Committee for Baseline. This has been a experience of a lifetime. So I've got to thank John and company for really letting us come into the fold here. But with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion, obviously the global climate right now has brought this a little bit more to the forefront. So, you know, we wanted to take this time to just kind of remind everyone, right? The Baseline community is most definitely inclusive, right? We are falling over ourselves trying to make sure that we've got people coming in from all over the place. And we cannot stress enough how much we could use your help. This is definitely an exciting project. I, for one, have been welcomed with open arms and hoping that I can do my part to continue the conversation. You know, for our part at Consensus, you know, tomorrow's a pretty big day for us because the entire company has decided to observe Juneteenth or June 19th. You know, if you need some information on that, please let me know in the chat and I'll provide some more on that. But it is of historical significance here in the United States with regards to Black history here. So that a company like that can make a decision, it is definitely a step in the right direction. You know, if anyone kind of has comments in the chat now about, you know, questions, concerns, comments, you know, we just kind of wanted to take this time to do that, this kind of fireside chat and make sure that we gave everyone an opportunity because this is definitely near and dear to me. I'd like to see more representation across the board. The blockchain community is all about how we make the world a more inclusive, more transparent, better place. So it's definitely incumbent on us who are already in it to make sure that we don't lose focus on that, right? Many of us have our own biases, whether implicit or otherwise, that we want to make sure we address. And yeah, that's kind of the quick flyover, you know?
Yeah, so I'm gonna pull Linda Getz into this conversation as well, so she can be a part of this too for a moment. Linda, can you speak? Are you allowed to talk now? Linda. Linda, check.
Yeah, don't know if we lost her, if we got her.
Maybe. Oh. Well, anyway, maybe Linda will say a few words.
Sure. I mean, I'll keep going in that, you know, so I've been in the information security space pretty much my entire career. Yeah, it looks like Linda's connected from another system, by the way. Been in information security my entire career, and we generally lean toward the IT function. So I've seen throughout, you know, a concerning lack of diversity, you know, gender or otherwise. So, you know, as we as society start really asking tough questions about where we've been historically, how we got here, and how we change that. Again, I mean, you know, baseline being, you know, the baseline protocol being this idea, this mechanism for making sure that everyone is kind of on, you know, let's call it the same path. You know, I'd like to use that forum to, you know, to address, you know, issues with inequality across all spectrums, across all verticals, et cetera. You know, Kyle and I have been meeting weekly, just talking about, you know, progress with baseline, in particular, focusing on security. But of course, in our side chats, you know, we bring our own experiences and how we can help. So I also want to just kind of lend that voice out to anyone out there that thinks maybe we haven't had enough representation. I identify with a person of color, as a person of color. So if people need that kind of safe space to talk, we're here, we're listening, and we want to make sure that that's front and center here, because this is a very inclusive community.
Thanks a lot, Stephen. Yeah, it's been a pleasure working with you. It's just going to get better.
Yeah, man. Good
Yeah, it's exciting. Yeah, so it looks like we're going to move on. Looks like
Linda's good to go. I see her in chat. If you want to give her a quick second before Yorke comes on.
Sure. Linda, can you speak?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm not sure if you can activate my camera or not. I'd love to say hello to everybody, not just with the Blockchain Chamber of Commerce logo.
There you go.
Hey, fantastic. And I love your background, Stephen. I feel like I'm disappointing, you know, the audience by having just like a reg, you know, I'm here in the office kind of background. So I don't know.
Yeah,
if
Stephen's
my
background's
camera...
pretty killer. We have a few minutes, Linda. You know, so it's great to see you. Thanks for being here. Yeah, do your thing.
Yeah, no, happy to be here. And I love the conversation around diversity. And one of the talks that I've been doing is about diversification will determine your destiny. And a lot of people think about diversification and they go straight into the mindset of like, you know, do I have gold? Do I have bonds? Do I have, you know, land? Do I have art? Do I have, you know, what's in my portfolio, right? That's how people think about, you know, diversification when it comes to finances. I'm looking at a future where diversification is going to mean who's in your community. Who are you connected to? Is that community all looking the same? Because if they are, you're not prepared for the future. Is your community all of the same religion? If they are, you're not prepared for the future. And, you know, I'm thinking stuff like, you know, if you have a Beamer, do you also have a beater? I know this is kind of, a little bit of a different way of looking at diversification. But we have to, and I know what I'm saying is kind of a break from where we've been in the whole, like, you know, talking about magic message bus and, you know, all of that fun stuff. But you can't eat code, right? You can't hug a protocol. And we as human beings, that's really important for us to recognize that there is a need for us to diversify in these current times in a way that is absolutely necessary. And I know we're all enjoying watching Kyle, you know, just look intently at his screen because he hasn't highlighted my picture, but I'm just messing with you, Kyle. I'm going to throw this in. I diversified my portfolio by investing in Provide. And do I have the distinction, Kyle, of still being the only Atlanta-based investor in your company?
No.
Oh man, I lost that. You're gonna make me sad today. I thought I had that.
We do appreciate you.
But diversification is vital, and as we look at history, it really gives us a heads up and awareness of what we need to be prepared for in our futures. And we've already had things happen in our lifetime now. Our kids are experiencing it with COVID-19, with the unrest. It's not necessarily a throwback to the past of the, you know, everybody's talked about the Spanish flu and, you know, how that correlates. And, you know, yes, we have to learn from that past, but we're also dealing with a whole different slew of technologies and ways of integrating globally. And we have to prepare for a different kind of future. And so as we go into, you know, the future of this event, I just wanted to throw that in. And I'm not sure, Kyle, exactly, you know, how much time you had allotted me, because when I was transitioning the systems.
That's about all we've got.
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity, hopefully to shift your perspective just a little bit into different aspects of diversification. And I hope you make a change today that expands your diversification in unique ways. So thank you, Kyle, for the opportunity, and would love for everyone to connect with the blockchain ecosystem and the Blockchain Chamber of Commerce. Really happy to see what's happening with the Baseline protocol, and looking forward to learning more with you guys as we move forward today. So thanks again.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you, Linda.
Thanks, Stephen. Do you have anything else to say, Stephen, to wrap that up?
No, please. Yorke Rhodes is following. Come on. What am I going to say before that?
But Stephen, thanks a lot for saying a few words today, and look forward to working together more.
Likewise.
Cool.
Nice background, Stephen.
Yeah, that background's killer for sure.
Into the ether.
There we go. Hey, Yorke. So Yorke Rhodes, you're going to talk a little bit about Azure. I guess I need to.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so let's talk about Azure. Let's talk about public blockchain in the context of the Baseline protocol and Microsoft's involvement, and I guess just sort of your vision for the future of this initiative.
Yeah, so you know, I think Baseline is an interesting point in time to really teach the world about how you can use a public commons securely and do it in a way that makes sense. And if you go back to, I think, some of the earlier, certainly the early thoughts that I had when getting involved with public blockchain, particularly Ethereum, was really the thesis that the future of the internet and the future of blockchain probably looks very similar to the internet. And so, you know, blockchain as a transaction layer for the internet, blockchain as a common message bus is really sort of where Baseline fits right in, right? And so we really started this project together with John and Paul and Kartheek from EY and John from Consensus, obviously, to really answer that question, you know, what would have to be true for enterprises to use a public commons? And so, you Based on that, and based on a lot of the work, the great work that EY had already done with zero knowledge proofs, we had a pretty good starting point to think about this problem. And it was just such a great opportunity point in time to collaborate together to really answer sort of the underlying question that has been sitting out there, which is, if enterprises are going to do this, what has to be true, and what do we have to go prove to the CISOs of the world that it is true. And so it's been a phenomenal journey. Obviously, the work is open sourced within the context of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance and very aligned to a lot of the work that's going on at the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, where I'm a board member. So it's sort of a great jumping off point. You want to direct me somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, so what about the Azure blockchain service?
Yeah, so as we look at blockchain technologies, we've been on this journey around blockchain in Azure since 2015, when we really started understanding it, and then building an engineering team in 2016, looking at how Microsoft could be a good open source partner, collaborator with the partner community, and not do things that would be perceived as dark side type of activities that you typically associate with large enterprise. And so we were very careful to think about how we could add value to the ecosystem and really not hurt the ecosystem and hurt people, because it's such a vibrant open source community. And so one of the first things we did was around development, really look at how could we take Visual Studio code resources and the 12 million plus developers who are using that code base and start to expose them to blockchain technologies in a way that would be accessible to a Visual Studio code user first, and then secondly to an enterprise blockchain developer or an enterprise developer that's curious about blockchain. And so I think we've done a very good job there. I think some of the effort that we recently took on the blockchain development kit was to help the open source community understand that Visual Studio Code plus the blockchain development kit is actually a tool that is usable for open source development, that doesn't require you to go adopt the whole of Microsoft, right, from a cloud perspective if you don't want to, but certainly gives you an opportunity to be exposed to the value proposition of a blockchain knowledgeable cloud estate, right, that could really bring additional value propositions into the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
We participated in the Gitcoin hackathon. We funded some bounties during New York Blockchain Week this year, as well as last year with EthATL, to really sort of engage some of the open source developer community around that. So that is sort of a developer bridge, which is actually, I think, is quite useful. We'd love to see much more adoption of that piece of work, and we'd love to really hear more from the open source community, particularly more advanced developers in the blockchain space. Like, how does it help you, or how does it not help you, and how do we continue to evolve that product so that it can be more relevant to all the great work that's going on in the blockchain community.
Yes.
So that's just one piece of work, right? We also have a blockchain service offering, which is, like training wheels for enterprise, basically in some sense, right? Where you help people stand up a service offering so that it has the typical enterprise service level agreements that you would find in something, for example, like an Azure SQL offering, right? Where we have other products that are managed service offerings that make it very easy for enterprises to consume without having to worry about the underlying infrastructure nuances. And in particular, in a new technology like blockchain, this is actually quite helpful, right, as an onboarding process for enterprises and enterprise developers, because as you know, right, going down the blockchain rabbit hole and understanding what it means to have linked hashed block references is not something that most enterprise developers are dealing with, right? So, you know, it's a helpful starting point. And then secondly, because we are delivering a service offering in cloud, the bar for success and the bar for Microsoft to be able to deliver a service offering has a very, very high service level agreement with our customers. And so it helps to push the envelope in the open source community and say, you know, there are a lot of things that enterprises expect when they use technology like this. And so let's work on those things, whether it's being integrated with an enterprise directory service like the Active Directory, and having some knowledge of what that means from the perspective of a blockchain key versus the Active Directory entry, you know, of a user. Whether it is just things like standing up the relevant secure networking interconnects between the participants in the network, and being able to do that in a scripted, sequenced, automated fashion. You know, these are not necessarily simple things from a setup perspective, but even more importantly, as you look at the health of the network over time, requires a pretty high degree of monitoring and uptime reliance across, you know, different products. So that's the Azure Blockchain Service. It's obviously foundational for many other things that could be built on top of that. As you know, and the way we sort of look at the world is, you know, why do people buy SQL Server? Well, they don't buy SQL Server because they like doing SQL. They buy SQL Server because it's part of an application stack, right? And so in a blockchain world, as blockchain grows up, it becomes a part of an application stack, and therefore it has to be accessible as a component of an application stack, right? And has to integrate with other components that enterprises are using.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense from the perspective of like the baseline protocol. Like, this isn't going to be a very rapidly evolving protocol. It's not going to be straightforward to build using the baseline protocol unless you have a very automated, you know, stable way to manage protocol upgrades along the way. Especially when every week, you know, everyone's environment needs to be upgraded. So I think there's a very obvious value proposition from that perspective. There's a question in the chat sort of about, is there a blockchain, Azure Blockchain Service or similar sort of way or managed service to connect to the mainnet? And I think that, you know, it's a great question. I think it's from my understanding that it's currently a quorum-based service, but you know, I think there's obviously opportunities there to you know, to extend that into the mainnet.
Yeah, so we have so two things. One, blockchain is hybrid, right? So you have to build systems that understand that you're going to have hybrid environments if you're respecting the philosophy of blockchain at all. And so that's one of our sort of key pillars as we look at blockchain networks, the ones that we build under Azure Blockchain Service or other ones that exist on Azure. Specifically to the mainnet and baseline, we've worked historically very closely with the Infura team over the last couple of years. There was a time period when Infura actually had diversified infrastructure where about half their nodes were running on Azure and half their nodes were running on AWS. So we're currently working with the Infura team to stand up some additional services so that you can have a first class experience on Azure to connect to mainnet through their service. My belief is that plus something like a gas station faucet or capabilities is going to be necessary for enterprises to connect to the Ethereum mainnet in the short term, because enterprises need an accessible way to do that, right? And enterprises, if you talk to almost any enterprise, they have not gone through the process of understanding what it does mean to pay for gas, right? So that's a sort of a key barrier to entry that needs to be solved for. And it is also one of the things that we obviously brought up in the baseline protocol work, right? We need to make this accessible. We also need to make it scalable. when I say scalable, if you think about baseline stack, you're doing quite a different number of things there. I know you already spoke with Kartheek, so he probably went through some of the architecture, but running zero knowledge proofs at scale is not a simple problem to solve, right? If you're thinking about a service that relies on zero knowledge proofs, you need to really be thinking about how do you scale proofing and how do you scale verification, and how do you do that with varying levels of demand on a system, and do it with a certain level of service, right? That somebody's going to want, right, from an enterprise perspective. So when we think about our work with the baseline project is really thinking through those problems, right? How do we actually create a service offering that's deployable, but not even just deployable, that actually has some kind of reliability and serviceability as well from a scale of one of the harder problems, right, which is the proofing aspects of this.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Go ahead.
There are, so there are a lot of different templates in the Azure Marketplace aside from the Azure Blockchain Service template. Some of those templates specifically address public Ethereum. Some of those templates, frankly, are somewhat out of date because people are not maintaining them. So you also want to be careful of that. But as I said, I mean, there's definitely a desire to have some support through either partners, but basically have the ability through an Azure Marketplace to go deploy a solution that allows you to connect to mainnet. And again, whether that's in Pura or other products like that, or or just, for example, a Besu template running in Azure, which already is there, by the way. You can stand up a Besu template today. That is, if somebody can probably find that in the marketplace and drop the link in there. That allows you to connect to the mainnet today, and it's one of the things that actually we like about our collaboration with the Pegasus team that is behind Besu. Is we know they have their feet firmly in both the enterprise permission blockchain camp as well as the public Ethereum camp, and that they also have work going on very specifically around Ethereum 2.0. And so being close to that team gives Microsoft an ability to really sort of have a front row seat on what's going on and make sure that we are developing appropriate capabilities in conjunction with those partners as things move forward here.
Yeah, what do you think the timeline is on seeing actual public blockchain applications running on Azure?
Well, I think
that's not the easiest question to answer.
Yeah, I would answer that question in a slightly different way, which is when are there relevant applications that enterprise businesses and lines of businesses want to consume that leverage public Ethereum, right? Which is very specifically, if you look at the type of feedback that we've gotten from the great demonstration work that was done by the community, showcasing an SAP RFQ process going across public Ethereum and interacting live with a Dynamics, supplier essentially, right? That type of interoperability is something that literally every provider who's being asked by enterprise customers has been trying to solve, right? And there's multiple levels of interoperability, but that from a business purpose perspective, that's where your first interest is going to come from in terms of applications. Lighting up massive user bases of applications like SAP or Dynamics or Salesforce or other products like that is actually how you get the attention of lines of business within enterprise. After that, everything becomes great, that's what I want, right? I want to be able to do this because it gives me flexibility in my business. Go figure out the technical stuff, right? It's a very different approach than what's historically being done in the blockchain space, which is let's, go figure out the underlying protocols and the nuances of all different types of interesting systems, whether financial or otherwise, in through smart contracts in the Ethereum blockchain space and others. It has been very necessary, obviously, but it is not the approach of enterprise, right? Enterprise says, I have a business problem. I know what applications that I use to solve that business problem. If I can solve that in a better way using the same applications, then there's like no friction, right? There's no desktop friction, right? Because one of the key problems with any kind of enterprise process is that you've got users who are in tune with what they use and have a very specific process, right? And so, you know, while certainly digital transformation is on everyone's mind, particularly these days, digital transformation is not easy, right? And so going to where the users are already and plugging in new capability like we've done with Baseline is pretty amazing opportunity to drive a different understanding of how you could use a public commons or a utility like Ethereum mainnet.
Yeah, and to me, it's all about the massive reconciliation savings that you'll get from not having to experience the same sorts of accounting snafus that you have sort of today without that common middleware. You know, like there's still, you know, the process of actually, like, for example, in a warehouse, loading pallets up. There's still some aspect of human error there that could happen with this, even in a baseline process.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, beyond that, not having to to do this manual reconciliation with your counterparties just seems like a no-brainer. Yeah,
I mean, and I think that's a good point, because that has been a you know, sort of a vector of success in the private blockchain space, right? So I think the nuance that we have to focus on if we're thinking about public commons is, what is the additional value proposition in doing that if you're doing it with a public commons, right? And it's actually not hard to get there, because you can look at the evolution of e-commerce over the years, right? And today you can do commerce with anybody over the internet because the right protocols are in place, right? In some sense, that's sort of the thesis here, is that you don't have to be locked into a small set of participants who have agreed to lots of rules and conditions to participate. You can actually treat the internet as a whole as potential endpoints to do business, very similar to how we do it today with e-commerce. And we rely on something called DNS to validate that we're actually talking to a Microsoft.com and not, you know, an Oracle.com, as an example, you know, as the validation of the endpoint. And so if you have that type of validation for endpoints on this public transaction commons, then, you know, the thesis is that, you know, you can then think about it in the same way. Right now, you've got basically anybody who participates in this public commons and has a valid registered endpoint is a potential collaborator over the public commons.
Yeah, that sort of goes back to the conversation we were having earlier about NATs and how we're storing a NATs endpoint in the, you know, on the public blockchain. Mm-hmm. You know, it's an open endpoint, and when you need to send baseline protocol messages or raw data to a counterparty, you can just look them up and dial them, you know, point to point, essentially. And so it's very much, it's an exciting time for this technology.
Yes, I totally agree. And, you know, what's also, I think, interesting is the sort of the evolution of the underlying protocol while there's this awakening around the capabilities of Baseline, right? And so there's really like two big, you know, potential things that are happening here at the same time. So.
Excellent, Yorke. Do you have anything else to add, or any final thoughts?
I was just looking at one of the questions, actually from John. I don't like his example, but he's right. I mean,
bananas and guns.
There is value in a recorded untruth, right? And that value is about reputation, right? And so, you know, if you spend any time in the decentralized identity space, you know, which obviously is rooted in public blockchain, you spent a lot of time thinking about this problem, right? Like, how do I verify an endpoint, and how do I know that that endpoint has a good reputation versus a bad reputation? So there's an overlap here, something that I've been sort of poking at a little bit with the team around what is this registry? And really, we should be thinking very hard about like DID constructs and verifiable claims.
Agreed. Awesome.
So what's your next next victim, Kyle?
Yeah, so the next victim is Hudson and Mahesh Sahasranaman. Yeah, I knew I was going to mess his name up.
That was
Mahesh
good, I think.
Sahasranaman. Mahesh, I'm so sorry. Mahesh and Hudson are going to have a fireside chat about UPS, sort of what we're calling it, the Atlanta Blockchain Showcase. Mahesh has a lot of awesome insight into what's happening at UPS. And
awesome.
and how he thinks about the public blockchain or how he doesn't think about it, I think that perspective is very valuable at this juncture as well. So,
I agree.
I'd like to turn the floor over to Hudson and Mahesh Sahasranaman. Yeah, so Mahesh, I love you.
Well, thank you so much, Kyle, and I'll hang around to listen. Thanks.
Thanks, Yorke.
Hey, Kyle. This is Mahesh.
Hey.
Hello, this is Hudson.
I'm glad this is getting recorded and you trying to say my name.
I am too. No, it's on the record.
You're practicing, I should say.
It is on the record.
Yep, we got this live streaming all over, so that's working out great.
I love it.
Thanks, Kyle, so much for bringing us on, and thanks, Yorke. Great presentation there, and everyone today. This has been a great event so far. We're streaming live to YouTube. We're also on Zoom, and we're going to have a short time for Q&A after the discussion, the fireside chat I'm having with Mahesh. So if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the Q&A bubble in Zoom. It should be down below by the chat button. Or if you're on YouTube, I have the YouTube chat up. You can also put in questions there as we're going along. So feel free to throw your questions at Mahesh, and let's go ahead and get started. I'm Hudson Jameson from the Ethereum Foundation, and I have the pleasure of talking to Mahesh today. Mahesh, if you want to give an intro real quick and explain a little bit about yourself.
Awesome. So Mahesh, and my last name is Sahasranaman, Kyle. I hope you'll get it.
I think that's what I said, right?
I think so. Close enough.
That's good.
So I'm the principal architect for the UPS Supply Chain Solutions Growth Markets and International IT area. And my responsibility includes technology, architecture, and governance for all of 3PL or third-party logistics services. And apart from that, I also have IT responsibility from a blockchain perspective for the organization. So that's my, I should say, it's turned into, it started off as a part-time, and now it's almost I'm living it in different situations. So that's a little bit of me, and as we go along, we'll talk a little more.
All right, thank you so much. So I got a few questions here to kind of get the conversation going. One of them is, you know, UPS is someone who I feel like has innovated in order to compete with other companies like FedEx and USPS and stuff like that. So how would you describe your company's approach to innovation, and how did that translate into exploring blockchain technology in general?
Right. So historically, if you look at, you know, a 100 plus year old company, we have innovated our way through those years. And I think that has become a core foundation. It's a core tenet. It's one of our goals. So we call ourselves an innovation-driven company. It runs all the way down from the management committee layer all the way down. And we try to find areas where the innovation, we just don't do it for just coolness, right? It needs to add a little bit of business value. It needs to do something to move the needle from a business perspective. And we have adopted, many of those technologies. So if you hear things like Orion, or if you heard, Flight Forward, which is the drone-based airline, right? So if you hear those things, those are all culmination of many years of R&D work, adoption of innovative technologies, and then using those technologies to drive process and economic improvements within the company. And in some use cases, where you're talking about drones, that goes above and beyond just UPS. It goes into the humanitarian space, where we drop blood samples and things like that in South Africa, and we help communities with that way using technology. So it's very deep rooted in terms of how we look at innovation, how we want to take technologies and move forward with it. Now, bringing it back to blockchain is very similar in that aspect, right? So it is something that, we talked about drones for many number of years, and finally we have something where we can use it, right? This is in that space for us. In terms of how this technology can be used, what it's going to provide in terms of benefit, and essentially how that benefit is going to materialize in different areas we focus on, whether it be customers, whether it is from a humanitarian perspective, whether it's sustainability, right, from different angles. So that's what we're looking at, that's where we are, and that's how, any technology that we look at, we try to derive business process of, value in any of those multiple areas, and then we try to move forward with viable and valuable use cases. Hudson, I think you're on mute. I can't hear you.
Oh, yep, I was on mute. I am back. I said, when you were talking about the different use cases, the thing that stuck out to me was the drones one. That's one that I think I'd be pretty excited about. I've heard before of people integrating blockchain, contracts or smart contracts into drones being able to enter buildings or through a window, or get permission sets that are expandable and, not siloed off from the rest of the different enterprise systems that, companies usually employ. So I see a real cool future for something like that. And I hope that, the integration with blockchain technology at UPS will eventually, bleed over into the other areas of innovation at your company.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope, that when we look at these technologies, we eventually want to use them in capacities that is meaningful for us, right? So we're constantly on the lookout. Blockchain is one arsenal. Drones from an automation point of view was one. There are other automation things from robotics and things like that we're looking. So yeah.
Great. So right now, in your view, what's one of the most exciting use cases, either real world that you're seeing today or proof of concept? And this can be related to UPS or outside of UPS. Go crazy with this one, but what's the most exciting blockchain use case in your opinion?
Yeah, so from a UPS point of view, we are looking at many different use cases in the logistics space. No surprise there in terms of what our interest is. And now, that's a big statement, right? Logistics space is a big statement. But if you want to kind of distill it down to specific areas of interest, then it would certainly, we'll talk about visibility being a big pillar. We can talk about how we do our third-party logistics, where we hand off shipments to multiple carriers and providers, being the second aspect of it. And if you talk more in terms of integrating with our customers and partners and things like that, then you go more into the provenance space of how we kind of tie into these various ecosystems of various blockchains. So those are the three sort of the pillars, if you will, where we are kind of focused. And if you can envision those pillars, and if you want to kind of break it down, then there are certain business focused areas that sort of materialize, right? So if you look at freight forwarding, there is a use case there. If you look at international trade, there is a certain use case there. If you look at risk management across that space, there is a use case there, right? So that's our perspective in terms of how we want to look at use cases. And those use cases have to drive value, right? It has to, all of the conversation, you'll hear me constantly say that has to come back to value. It has to come back to generate something for us, something for the customer, and it has to be in a manner that's fair to all the parties that are engaged in this conversation with this technology.
Whenever you are working on innovative solutions at UPS, would you say that that it's sometimes more difficult to work with a bunch of different enterprise systems? Like I kind of alluded to earlier, a lot of these are siloed and there's different technologies having to connect to different systems. Has blockchain specifically been easier or more difficult to integrate with those systems? That's generally like a big problem that I've heard people have.
Yeah, so we'll try to explain that with a use case, right? So when we talk about let's say an international trade movement use case, that's a very valid use case. You know, it's a very common, well-established process across almost all logistics providers at this point, right? You start with your manifest, you have your commercial invoices, you have a certificate of origins, you have the letters of credit, you have all of these documents that you have, and you move these documents from a provider to provider as you are in this 3PL journey, right? And I use this as an example only because in the freight forwarding space, as an example, you know, UPS necessarily doesn't use, you know, our assets alone, right? We leverage all the assets that are available for us across our different suppliers, partners that we deal with. And the rules hold true, right? So we have to give them a manifest, which can be electronic or paper. They need certain documents to clear customs. They need certain security documentation, right? So it goes on and on and on in terms of the pieces of paper, the pieces of information that gets traded. So the fantasy with this technology, so to speak, is can we reduce these type of handoffs that happen between different parties? Can we create some sort of a mechanism where if the information is collected and curated, and can this kind of translate, can this move along, you know, the participants in the chain? That's one angle. And the second is the byproduct of that, right? So if you do that, can you then get, can you get to accelerate commerce? It's no longer about, hey, it's just seamless, I don't have to share documents. The value then comes in terms of, hey, I can move borders quickly. I have agencies that rely on this information and think that it's golden. Can we get to that state at some point? And then lastly is in terms of efficiency and cost again, right? So does it drive efficiency for us, for our partners? Does it drive a behavior change for us and our partners? All right, so behavior change as an example would be if you have something that's going in your pipeline and you know that there are some excursions, you need to take some actions. You have now empowered your suppliers and your providers to act on that information by providing it timely as part of this technology, right? So, and then the last part is can pieces, because you're not handing off papers, maybe you're not doing a lot of key entry work, maybe you're not replicating information, can you take some cost out that will then reflect in some other metric within each of the organizations, right? So those are the essential, three tiers in terms of how a particular, even when we look at a particular use case, how that kind of materializes for us, or at least how we envision that to materialize. You're on mute again, Hudson.
Oh man, my speaker set is not being cooperative today. Sorry. I was going to say, that I hear time and time again that enterprises really look to blockchain for cost savings. And I think that is definitely a very important thing to factor in. Something else I've heard factored in, depending on the industry, is the immutability aspect of blockchains, or depending on who you ask, the relative immutability. How do you see that playing into, how blockchain is used today and the importance of immutability or the lack of importance?
Yeah, the immutability piece is important, and it's important, especially when you're dealing with multiple parties that don't belong in relation to a particular transaction, right? So we think that there is a place for that from a technology point of view, and it is also, we believe it is necessary to drive accountability and behavior. And also maybe it becomes a pillar to maybe incentivize certain types of activities. So immutability and having that information timely is important in those aspects. It is also maybe, if we kind of fast forward this and think about government regulations or customs organizations as an example, if they come back and want information in a certain structure, in a certain way, in a certain order, then the immutability aspect kind of plays there as well, right? So we see that there is importance for that. We see that there can be certain behavior, certain value proposition we can drive with it, but we have also seen on the flip side, getting to that point of, hey, immutability also presents interesting challenges. Is, do we want to get there at that point? Because in the supply chain space, getting one organization to do processes and practices in the way it's defined itself is challenging. Now, when you put multiple organizations and you start to define processes and practices, and then you combine that with a hard asset that's actually moving in your network, that magnifies the problem, right? And when I say that, I'm giving benefit of the doubt, because to everybody involved in a particular transaction, and I'm saying this because it might be well intentioned that they have to move a shipment because there may be something wrong with the system, maybe their network is down, maybe something happened that they're not able to update it at that point in time, but they have to get the shipment moving to meet the SLA. Now you have a disconnect. So yes, immutability is great and good for certain things, but then it should not have these false positives where a genuine action has been taken because of some other impediment, right? So you got to be able to balance both of those things. It's not very hard. Immutability is the only way, and that's the blockchain. What blockchain provides is the only thing I'm going to rely on. Right? It cannot just get to that point, at least in our in our use cases in our industry.
Great answer. Great answer. So another thing question I had, today we've talked a lot about mainnet, public blockchains, things like that. What's your opinion on public blockchains, and have you considered using a public blockchain or, not using one for your use case? What would the reasons be?
Yeah, to completely honest, I heard Baseline when Kyle called me up and said, "Hey, do you want to? Are you interested in participating in a Fireside chat?" So that's my first introduction to Baseline, and I've heard chatters of it in the past. Never really paid attention because, again, we from an organization point of view, we have looked at blockchain in the past, or public blockchains in the past, right? And we have looked at it from a technology perspective. The parts and pieces of what makes up a public blockchain, what components are interesting, the relevance aspect of it, how we engage with the technology. We have gone through that activities to understand it. And then I believe Yorke mentioned, hey, enterprises don't really understand the concept of gas and all that, which is very true. So how does that play into all of this? And then there is the second part around public blockchain itself is around the concerns around the whole, the data standards. What data do we put in there? The security aspect of it, the privacy, legal realm, and then if you peel that a little bit, does the data that is provided to UPS, does it belong to UPS, right? So if you're ordering something from, a retailer, and UPS has a contract with the retailer for providing that shipping service, does that data inherently become a publicly consumable information, or is it information that only three parties are interested in, the consignee, the shipper, and the carrier that's moving? Right, so it's also the relevance of that data in the public realm, so to speak. And then we've also considered things like, so okay, if you can't go down that path, maybe are we an Oracle then to provide certain things to enable certain other activities in the blockchain? Then you very much go into the conversations of technologies of today. Oh, we have APIs that do that for you. So how is this adding value, right? And then lastly, I think I would add that the pedigree of public blockchains and the messaging has also kind of, I would say, with cryptocurrencies and of course CryptoKitties, how can I forget that, right? Has sort of muffled the message a little bit around how enterprises can use it beyond that use case. I kind of think that there is value, but we need we have certain questions in the enterprise blockchain or public blockchain adoption space that very really that needs to be addressed as we go down and take that journey. And one more thing, right? We can't, I would be remiss if I say public blockchain and don't bring up the issue of trust, right? How public blockchain inherently builds trust. In any large enterprise or organizations or enterprises or any organization for that matter, KYC is a big thing, right? Know your customer. We can't just anonymously just pick up, and deliver. That doesn't work in our industry. We need to know for many reasons, right? So does this technology, we talk about trust, and yeah, there are many layers of trust, but at the core of it, we really don't have untrusted things, right? We have a lot of trusted conversations to begin with. So I think that's where our kind of mindset is related to public blockchains. Would love to see how it evolves in the future, and if it makes sense to for organizations like us and our partners to kind of join in into such a thing.
Absolutely. And today, many of the presentations were around public blockchains, but at the same time, John mentioned, there's going to be a future where it's not just public blockchains, it's going to be, more private blockchains as well, maybe interconnections, things like that. And that's I think how a lot of people see the future of this technology is these kind of interconnections. We're seeing that with Cosmos and Polkadot and other technologies already that are starting to launch. So it's a really interesting thing to be looking out for. When you were talking about, the different like anonymous actors who make up a blockchain and not being able to verify them necessarily, how have you kind of ideated on the type of external stakeholders that would be involved in maybe a semi-private or private blockchain? Do we have, answers to that, like these external stakeholders who would be involved? What would make the consortium? Just what's the general consensus over these external stakeholders and how they would be managed?
Yeah, so we are taking a very much use case focused approach on that, unfortunately, and we're trying to get to a point where we can start to prove out use cases, and our conversations around how ecosystems form, how many members, so to speak, what they would provide into the blockchain, is all governed around very use case focused conversations. And so if you look at international trade, we might want, a consignee, a shipper, and a few other carriers in between, and maybe a couple of government agencies where the border crossing happens, so to speak, to kind of engage us in a use case based prototype or a conversation. So that's how we are seeing, and the evolution of that, I believe, at least, what is formulated in my head at least is that the amount of people that we will be talking to will be directly relational, or there will be direct relation to the number of or to the use case, right? It will be very use case specific. It'll be to the transaction that we are processing through, right? If we get to granularity. So private blockchains makes that a little bit easier for us. Yeah, there is a lot of setup activities and all that. I get that, which is complicated by nature, but we get to a point where we know who the parties are, which is essential from an enterprise organization perspective. We know what use case we are going to participate in. We know that they are the providers or suppliers that are relevant for that use case, and we can sort of bring them in together much more easier when we think of it that way. When we try to expand that and think about, can we enable this in some larger context, let's say, logistics space or something like that, it becomes very nebulous, and it adds a lot of parties to the conversation, and it evolves the conversation from establishing and trying to prove out your use case and its worth to now marketing a technology and trying to get people into that space, right? We don't want to get to marketing a technology perspective. We want to be able to market a particular service that we provide, and how blockchain benefits can be leveraged for that service. So that's how we kind of take it. It's a subtle difference between the two, but I think that's the viewpoint we're kind of taking.
Yeah, excellent answer. I think that lines up with a lot of people I've talked to, the concerns and some of the ways they're looking at, organizing these businesses. Just like you said, it's always going to be messy when you're working with different companies in general for any kind of technology solution and technology stack that might be newer. So this isn't unique to the industry at all. So and actually speaking of tech stacks, if you're able to, what have you explored as far as tech stacks are concerned? What types of technologies and things that have been valuable and have shown promise?
Yeah, we are predominantly dabbling in the two largest open source at this point, right? Ethereum, but with more quorum focused, because that sort of gives us that little protection that we need in terms of creating the semi-private chain, so to speak. And then the Hyperledger is the other framework that we are very interested in. But other than these two, I think those have been very much of an evolving conversation between the two. And then we have on and off looked at Corda for a couple of conversations, but not really materialized in that space. So essentially, there are these two or three is what we're looking at. And I also think at one point we had some conversations and discussions around Hashgraph and maybe how that technology plays in, and is that a substitute, replacement, alternate? We're trying to figure out where to place that in this conversation also. So yeah, right about there, but about the three, if not four.
Interesting. Yeah, those are definitely valuable software to compare and contrast when it comes to exploring which tech stack is working best for your company. As the architect, I'm assuming you have a team around you that is working with this technology. How excited are they about this? And have you gotten any feedback that this is wildly different than, or even similar than other technologies they've worked with from an innovation perspective or from a how to get started perspective? I know that people have had some feedback that there's not always good guides out there, that there's not always a lot of resources or precedent, especially for this type of technology. So what kind of feedback and response have you gotten from your team about this?
Yeah, so our engagement model is sort of we have prototypes that we do internally. We then engage with our customers and partners to test whatever they are building. So we participate in that context, and we do have participate in standards bodies too. So I mean that's our essential playbook from how engagement starts. Now, when we talk about our customers and partners, we have our sales and solutions and those guys that are very much high touch, customer focused individuals that bring in use cases that customers might be interested in, right? So if they heard a customer talk about blockchain, interested in blockchain, so it comes into our funnel. And then we have a couple of people that look at these use cases and from a marketing point of view and from a product development point of view. And then if it makes sense, it then comes into the IT bucket, right? So that's the normal process for us. And then inside the IT bucket, we at this point, we don't have large teams that are supporting blockchain technologies. We are very much on a case-by-case basis. We kind of spin up teams, or we do the prototype, and we kind of disband them. And one of the reasons why we haven't taken that next step yet to kind of get a team or form a team is we are still kind of thinking about what technology stack we are going to adopt. Number one. Number two, is this even a material technology for us to invest human capital in at this point? And the last part is we're, you know, if you ask it, you know, if you take it to an organization and a priority point of view, blockchain has not yet made, you know, the top priority list yet. It's a technology that is still in the evaluation phase. There is a lot of support from the management committee down to evaluate and take active look at this technology. But it's not a priority in terms of, hey, we're going to do, you know, these 5 projects with this technology. We're not there yet. And that kind of leads or is led from the belief that we don't think blockchain is or maybe viable yet for using something just internally. So that's where we are. And then from a standards point of view, we participate. We have teams that we have not teams, but team members that participate in BIDA standards development and those type of things.
Can you expand on the standards development? Do you mean like with different standards organizations collaborating, or more like an internal thing?
Yeah, so we are, UPS is a member of the Blockchain and Transportation Alliance, BIDA, and we are also participating in data standards development, right? So it's very specific. So how should, you know, what should be the definition of a location? What should be a definition of an address? You know, across, and we want to, the objective of participating in those and the objective of BIDA itself is to create something like a, you know, we like to call it the USB spec, right? It's something that we define, but, you know, whether you want to put that USB stick inside of a camera or whether you want to put it in a, you know, in a mouse, we really don't care. But we want you to follow the standards, the spec. We want you to kind of adhere to it as closely as possible across multiple organizations. So then we don't have this whole translation and interpretation of what we feel is what, and messing around with, you know, messing around. So when I say messing around with the data format, I kind of refer back to EDI. EDI, you know, and I like to kind of joke about it a little bit, is the only thing common about EDI are the numbers. Everything else is very specific to the organization that functions with the EDI or you know, does transactions between 2 entities using an EDI message. So that's where we are, you know, the 3-pronged, you know, customer-focused POCs, internally built POCs, and then standards.
Excellent. So we're going to wrap up on this kind of this chat itself and then move into Q&A. But before we do that, is there anything you want to say as kind of a final statement from this fireside chat about what you all are working on at UPS, or just final thoughts in general?
Yeah, this has been a very interesting journey for us. So I took this over from another team that was managing internally within UPS, and I took it over at a time when there was extreme hype about Bitcoin. The Bitcoin was at an all-time peak, about 17,000 or something like that. And we had requests coming in from all different parts of the organization. In terms of what we're doing with the technology, there was a sense of feeling that that we probably missed out on this, that we weren't paying enough attention on this technology. But it's interesting to see how all that hype is sort of now is sort of died down, and the technology itself is turning into this whole, hey, let's give a very rationalized look at what we can do with this technology. It's getting very focused on some of the areas we feel are important for enterprise adoption. So when we talk about interoperability, there's a lot of efforts that's happening there. When we talk about projects enabling enterprise blockchains with privacy and security focus, there's a lot of projects there. There is also, it's very heartening to see tooling that's getting available more and more in terms of how we can not only build, deploy, and support and monitor these type of things, and across multiple parties in an ecosystem. So yes, it's for us, from where I started to where I see, it's evolving. And I would like to see this continue and evolve. And I also would like to see this, that when we talk about baseline and when we talk about, new technologies, I would like to see, a lot of enterprise focus in it. Not just in terms of, hey, I've solved the security process and practices, but also from scalability and performance and meeting some of those non-functional objectives that we have, right? And I liken to say, if you go to our website and figure out, how many, shipments we delivered, and you multiply, five events per package delivered, can a blockchain of today handle that? And can we put that there? And can it scale, right? I don't think the answer is, the answer probably is no. So how do we get to that point, right? The evolution and the journey to get that point for me is very interesting, to stay plugged in and to see how that can, and see if we can help in any way to make that happen, and to test out some of the use cases.
All right. I love ending on a positive note, a hopeful note. And the fact that this is gaining prominence in the industry is really, really exciting. So we're going to go to Q&A now. Again, you can, if you're able to, use the chat in YouTube. I believe there's a Q&A feature of Zoom that you're able to use, and we'll see if anyone has any questions. Also, if you're just on, if you're on the Zoom call as a panelist and you have any voice questions, feel free to just unmute yourself and go right ahead.
Yeah, I have one. Mahesh, are you able to say, or to mention what systems of record you guys are using at UPS? No pressure if you're not able to.
No, I can't. I think because there isn't one in terms of systems of record per se. It is, again, very focused on what we are asking about, right? So if you ask me, hey, do you have a system of record for visibility? I say, yeah, sure, I do. Right? Do you have a system of record for finance? Yeah, I do, right? But if you say, just generally, is there one? Probably not, and I don't think we will get to that point in a large organization like UPS, where we'll have just one thing that does everything. Probably not.
That makes sense.
Yeah, Kyle, I'd love to. I'm glad you asked that question. That was one that was on my mind the whole time. Mahesh, it's so great to see you here. And as you were discussing, this was my experience in the enterprise as well. We, in 2015, started getting excited about blockchain, thought of it as a database, and then spent 5 years figuring out how not to use it, right? So finding no traction for blockchain as a database, I'm not surprised about it all. But I think that really is the point, right? That we all have many different systems of record, whether it's SAP or homegrown or SCM or ERP or what have you. And what we have to start realizing is blockchain is not a place you put the data for that stuff ever, of any kind, private or public. But a public one might be the last mile of a of the middleware that is required to help ensure and enforce consistency between your system of record and mine. And that's what baseline protocol is all about, by the way. Right? And now your ERP system or your SCS system or SEM system and your finance system, you double down on those. You don't have to replace them or rip them out. You simply baseline them with, and now the record in your system is it not only knows what you think you know, but is verifiably without repudiation, knows what your counterparty knows on a record by record basis without letting any data or information out to the rest of the world, which is the key. So all the things that you were saying about why you wouldn't use a blockchain, exactly right. In fact, that's why we created the baseline protocol.
Well, that's an interesting teaser of what you're stating. It's very intriguing.
All right, do we got other questions coming down?
Sounds like public blockchain and baseline just got interesting to Mahesh.
I guess so. You know, you got to keep your eyes open. Never know what you might find and what technology might meet your needs.
Yeah, maybe put CryptoKitties on UPS on the blockchain. Just go all
there
out.
You go.
I think that's probably
turned out to be a thing.
That's probably the one issue that's remaining on public blockchain that ETH2 is really going to have to deal with is the noisy neighbor question, right? So even if you're even if you're doing hash management and ordering on the mainnet and that's it, right? Then your package doesn't have to worry about, you know, whether it scales for that because you're not going to put any of those data records on the blockchain. That's a dumb idea, right? But you're still going to want to make sure that the validation and those hashes that get laid down in a timely fashion and that there isn't a noisy neighbor crowding them out. I think that's going to be a key.
Yeah.
I got a question here. Where do you see blockchain and Ethereum 3 years from now? Just in, I guess, mostly blockchain in general, because ETH is going to be unpredictable enough with, you know, with all the phases for ETH2 coming up and everything. But yeah, where do you see the industry in 3 years when it comes to this stuff?
I think from a logistics point of view, I think we've always thought that high value use cases where there is a big bang for the buck kind of thing, that might end up in the blockchain space. But I think when I say high value, I'm talking about maybe, you know, pharma shipments that are shipping, you know, very high dollar value drugs. That need to be tracked to the nth degree, right? Maybe those, maybe some high value or jewelry or some sort of things like that. Maybe, you know, alcohol, firearms, tobacco, those type of shipments, right? I see that those type of use cases or those type of shipments, maybe that's where the journey starts before we kind of evolve it to everybody. Because the incentive for having information about those transactions across multiple parties is real, right? So if you're shipping, you know, firearm or something like that, or even alcohol as an example, you need to know, you know, who are you shipping? You need to know, can you cross state lines? Can you deliver it to this entity? Right. So, and if you're doing it across international borders, it's even interesting at that point. So I think that's where we'll see maturity.
I think the pharmaceutical supply chain case is a particularly interesting one, and it shows the point of why you need compartmentalization, why blockchain's a bad pattern for that if you're using it as the CRUD layer, right? Because you know, anybody with a node who may become a competitor in the future, even if you think right now it's a nice little happy consortium, you don't really want them to know all of those things, right? You want your immediate counterparty to know that you've taken the serialized lot and moved it from, you know, Pfizer to McKesson, right? But you do not want the pharmacy necessarily to know about the terms of the deal that made that happen, and vice versa, right? So you have to have really supremely good atomic level compartmentalization while also maintaining continuity of workflow, which again is kind of the point of baselining, right? So baselining is all about that, right? Not putting any of that on the blockchain, but rather using the blockchain just to make sure that you do not have inconsistencies.
Yeah,
Also,
the
your
notion
gateway
of
to DeFi. Sorry.
no, the notion you run an interesting notion of partners and companies and competitors, friendly ecosystem members becoming competitors, right? At some point, that's a very interesting concept, right? When I started looking, I had this very a naive type thing, like, why shouldn't everybody be on one blockchain? What's wrong with that? Right, and I've come to sort of a conclusion that or at least I shouldn't say conclusion because that seems final, but I have come to a position where that we probably will never have a single ecosystem. That's never going to happen. Okay, if that doesn't happen, then okay, it's valid, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But then how do you tie these different ecosystems together, right? What do you use that? And as you're tying it, how do you pass markers from one to the other? Right, to say that this is a marker in this ecosystem, go look in that one for that.
Right, or if you run into a workflow,
more relevant.
Yeah, like if you run into a workflow years after you created your workflow, and now you've got to call a network administrator and argue about which blockchain you're going to use, that's a terrible idea, right? But if you can say, look, we both have our anchors, our hashes, our workflow proofs on the main net, then we can say, well, nobody knows what those are. They just look like randomness to everybody else. But I can integrate step number 33 of my workflow with step number 22 of yours. And the parties in step number 55 don't even need to know about the parties in step 22, right? And you can do all of that at the application level without having to rejigger networks.
All right, we have another question. So this is from Cole. What happens to traditional EDI solutions and the VANs, which stands for value-added networks, that support those solutions?
They are not going anywhere, unfortunately. So they are the root of many integration points. So for the short term, they are not going anywhere. They're established. So when we talk about EDI, right? So the fundamental things with EDI, I think the essence of it is there in the blockchain, but what EDI does today is not what we want to do with blockchain, right? So EDI, as an example, is between two parties, or I could say threaded end parties, but essentially two parties, and you're passing your core data between the two entities back and forth. And EDI by itself provides a whole lot of features, right? Playback, read receipts, security, encryption. It just comes default with the package by adopting EDI. Whereas if you look at blockchain, we're saying that we don't want as much data flowing through the blockchain. We want some sort of representative notion of the data. And then blockchain by itself provides, some of the features. But it's not a one-to-one match. So I do believe that EDI kind of will exist. And it'll exist for foreseeable future. It's not going anywhere.
All right. We don't have any more questions in the lineup. So I think what I'm going to do is pass it back to Kyle. Thank you so much, Mahesh, for joining us and answering these questions and participating in the fireside. It's been very, very insightful.
Yeah, thanks a lot,
Absolutely.
Mahesh.
My pleasure.
And excellent job, Hudson. Thank you for
Thank you.
moderating.